The Jedi Order has long since been viewed as paragons of peace and hope across the galaxy, taking on roles as noble warriors and heroic guardians that seek to protect the innocent at all costs. Their inclusion in the Clone Wars was a widely controversial subject of discussion throughout the Republic, as the Jedi peacekeepers were meant to stay out of political disputes and were not supposed to follow governmental orders. This means that the image of the Jedi was largely tainted and damaged, but although they still sought to remain noble warriors, they allowed their morality to slip on a number of occasions. Some of these aforementioned lapses in judgment are in line with actual war crimes that we here on Earth and in the real world have deemed too heinous and despicable to even allow in times of warfare. Yet the Jedi Knights have been seen committing war crimes on the regular, especially during the Clone Wars. So what are some of the most atrocious acts of the Jedi during the Clone War, and what actions would be punished by international standards if they were to take place here on Earth in our current period of time? Well, stick with us today, weary acolytes of the galaxy, and let's cover some of the most heinous war crimes committed by the Jedi under the standards of the Geneva Convention, which outlined the standards of international humanitarian treatment during wartime in 1949. The first war crime that we'll be covering is the treatment of Jedi prisoners that they took into custody, and the various ways in which they violated their fundamental rights, which would have been unacceptable by today's standards. One such behavior is torture, more formally known as inhumane means of interrogation, but they mean essentially the same thing. In the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the guidelines forbid the use of force, both physical as well as psychological, in order to obtain information during an interrogation. While there are guidelines for the methods that are allowed, the Jedi seem to deviate from these standards on multiple occasions throughout the war. Force-based interrogation, for example, would most likely constitute psychological torture, as the Jedi literally invade the minds of prisoners in order to locate information about the war or information that they're withholding. And we see this being used against Cad Bane by Anakin Skywalker, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan Kenobi in tandem, including again 2 members of the Jedi Council. We can see them probing his mind for information as they showcases the severe discomfort as a result of this interrogation, meaning that if the Force existed in the real world, then force-based interrogation would most certainly be outlawed. While the Separatists also utilized torturous interrogation methods, they were not as seen as the paragons of virtue that the Jedi were, and the treatment of prisoners under the Republic even went so far as blatant, deliberate execution. While interrogation had a particular set of rules that must be followed, so too do the living conditions of prisoners, which is the next thing we'll be exploring. The Geneva Convention forbids any quote-unquote unlawful act by the detaining party that could cause death or serious endangering of the health of a prisoner of war. After disarming Count Dooku figuratively and literally, Anakin Skywalker executes Darth Tyrannus despite him being a prisoner of war and a surrendered combatant. At this moment, Dooku was not a reasonable threat to Anakin, and even states that he shouldn't kill Dooku, and his execution is the blatant definition of an unlawful act that causes death. Shortly after this, Mace Windu himself elects to execute Palpatine, and although he ultimately fails, he makes this decision while Palpatine too is a surrendered combatant and is showing no signs of being a credible threat at the moment. On a much larger battlefield that encompass entire armies fighting one another, however, the Jedi have been seen taking advantage of false surrenders and the assault of surrendering individuals. This law was designed to ensure that both sides of a conflict respect the flag of truce in order to allow for peace talks whenever possible. And this both forbids an army from continuing to fight anyone waving a white flag, as well as forbids false surrender in order to launch a surprise attack. The latter half of this has been done by both Anakin Skywalker as well as Obi-Wan on multiple occasions during the Clone Wars, including Obi-Wan's negotiation during the Battle of Christophsis while he is buying time for Anakin and Ahsoka to sabotage the shield generator behind enemy lines. In order to allow them time to infiltrate, Obi-Wan begins negotiating the terms of surrender, and he stalls as long as possible, which still constitutes as a false surrender. After the shields are down, Obi-Wan leaps into action and violates the terms of his surrender as well as the sanctity of the establishment of a truce, which would, by today's standards, most definitely be considered a war crime. Anakin, however, is notorious for this same maneuver, crashing a Venator-class Star Destroyer into a Separatist trade blockade during the Siege of Ryloth after negotiating his own surrender, as well as bailing Obi-Wan out of a jam during the first episode of Season 7. This means that the Separatists should not have entertained any potential surrender from any Jedi for the remainder of the war, and they would have had every right to, as they no longer would have any reason to trust the validity of a Jedi surrendering. It's also illegal to conscript child soldiers into combat, which of course the Jedi are most notorious for doing, as in Jedi practices that have long since been a point of contention both in-universe and outside of the Star Wars universe. The Jedi take younglings, even into active war zones. The Jedi Order is known for inducting members into their order as early as 3 years old, and training them from childhood to become warriors of peace and justice. But the Jedi's peace and justice. While this is already an incredibly controversial and unethical behavior by the Jedi, their entry into the Clone Wars makes this practice even worse. When the Republic went to war with the Jedi, they were enlisted as military leaders. They not only sent their best masters and most experienced knights into the battlefield, but they also sent Padawans into the field alongside these knights. Ahsoka Tano herself was just 14 years old when she was assigned to Anakin and was designated as the head of an entire clone battalion. She had command over legions of clones at just 14 years old, and this even led to the deaths of numerous clone troopers under her direct command. Ahsoka led a squadron into battle over Ryloth in the first season of the Clone Wars, and this led to the all-associated clones being killed in battle as a direct result of her ineptitude and inability to lead effectively, due in large part to her inexperience and young age. In the real world, these laws were not enacted to prevent children from leading soldiers, but they were instead put in place to protect children from being killed, and Jedi Padawans were slaughtered on the regular during the Clone War. One such example included a Padawan by the name of Nox who perished against Savage Opress on the planet of Devron, where he was tasked with defending the Edit Temple. Unfortunately, he was brutalized by an enraged Savage Opress. We also know that Kanan Jarrus was even younger than Ahsoka Tano during his time in the Clone War, and he just barely escapes the clutches of death during Order 66, an event which directly resulted in the execution of his master and would have most certainly resulted in his death had he not been lucky enough to escape. As of now, there is no telling how many Padawans and how many children were killed in battle, but the crimes continue. The Jedi have also utilized the use of incendiary weaponry, including flamethrowers, and while flamethrowers aren't outright banned in war, they are illegal to use against individuals. Ki-Adi-Mundi, however, uses flamethrowers to burn through Geonosian nests, and if there are any Geonosians left within these nests at this moment in time, then he would be violating Protocol 3 of the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, which was designed to protect individuals from the likes of flamethrowers as well as napalm. But what about in-universe? Are these actual war crimes in the Star Wars universe? While the Jedi themselves do not have any known equivalent to the Geneva Convention, this does not mean that their actions can be condoned, and the standards that we have here would have been violated by the Jedi Order on numerous occasions. This leaves us to wonder if the Jedi were truly the paragons of hope that they believed themselves to be, or if they were actually some of the most violent and inhumane warriors that the galaxy had to offer at the time. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of these ideas? What other atrocious acts can you think of that the Jedi committed during the Clone Wars, and how do you think the Jedi compared to the Separatists as well as the Empire in terms of their inhumane treatment of individuals? And are the Jedi just as bad? As always, my friends, hit that subscribe button and may the Force be with you.